Good morning, everyone. It's November 3rd, 2018. I'm Eric. I'm here at SHTF Plan. This one comes from Brandon Smith of thealtmarket.com. 3 events that can change the face of America. The past year in general has been a firestorm of news events, many of them misrepresented by the mainstream media, but nevertheless important signals that the economic, social, and geopolitical systems we are familiar with are changing or destabilizing rapidly. It is important to understand, however, that the implications of these events have been building for years, not mere weeks or months. And we can go back all the way back to the mid-1990s, right? to see that it's been going on for at least that long. There are not sudden or inexplicable consequences of linchpin theory. The outcome of these events was pre-planned and engineered far in advance. This doesn't mean that establishment interests, including globalists, will necessarily get what they want, which is why I believe they tend to produce multiple crises at once, hoping that at least a few will produce the effects they desire in the population. I call it the scattershot strategy. By creating a swarm of manipulated bullets of social, psychological leverage, each with the same intended target, the result becomes more certain and predictable. So, I'm going to go on and hit the events he says can change the face of America. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Few of us have ever heard of Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi a month ago, and most in the public still have no clue as to the implications of his death. We're not going to theorize much on the reason why the Saudi government apparently trapped Khashoggi in their consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, and then allegedly tortured him to death. And there are so many different versions of the story. A couple of them said that they dismembered him alive. So the Saudis aren't really nice people, are they? The mainstream theory is that this was punishment for the journalist's escape from Saudi Arabia and subsequent criticism of Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the rising dictator within the Saudi regime. And he asked the question, why did Khashoggi willingly and stupidly enter a Saudi consulate, which is considered sovereign Saudi soil? Wow, you hear that? Sovereign Saudi soil. When he knew he was a potential target for the government, why would Saudi agents murder the journalist in such an obvious way and in such an obvious place? If he was such a threat, why not kill him away from the Saudi facility? Why not make it look like a robbery or an accident? And it looks like all the normal procedures for assassination were not followed in the slightest when it comes to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And as Turkish authorities released information on Saudi involvement, the normal attempts to cover up by multiple governments were missing. This could have been muddled in a fog of disinformation leading the way from Saudi Arabia, but it wasn't. The consequences are immense. The end of diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia could result on the part of Western nations. There's even talk of Prince Salman being removed from power and his Vision for 2030 economic plan going the way of the dodo. I see this as a highly unlikely, though, or I see this as highly unlikely. While the mainstream misrepresents Salman's economic plan as a means to make Saudi Arabia less dependent on oil, the Vision for 2030 was primarily about distancing Saudi Arabia oil from dependency on U.S. and Western markets. The decoupling of the U.S. from Saudi Arabia has been in the making for years. This is not something new or something that would be decided by killing or by the killing of a single Saudi journalist. From the passage of the bill by Congress to make the Saudi government liable for damages during the 9/11 attacks, to Saudi threats to dump $750 billion in U.S. assets, to the Saudi atrocities in Yemen, to the rise of Mohammed bin Salman through extortion. There is no shortage of reasons why the U.S. and Saudi Arabia might end relations. Every time these guys talk about 9/11, they always forget to include the Israeli role in that terrorist attack. He says he's talking about the mainstream narrative. The deeper issue at hand is that globalists are seeking to end the U.S. dollar as world reserve currency, and the petrol currency in Saudi Arabia is a key catalyst to breaking the dollar's back in a way that makes it appear as though global banks had nothing to do with the situation. So we have pretty much we're going to get backstabbed by the Federal Reserve, the Bank of International Settlements, the Monetary Fund, so on and so forth. I'm trying to think of the other one. It's right at the tip of my tongue. The other bank, the Rothschild Bank. But then again, which banks aren't Rothschild? Okay, so the second event that they're talking about is the immigrant caravan. And I touched upon this yesterday in my other video, how it was mostly military-aged men coming, and that some of these individuals are sneaking across the border with things like RPGs and AR-15s, AK-47s, and so on. So their intentions are not good. Illegal immigration is a pillar issue within U.S. politics, at least in terms of conservatives and their support for any particular piece of legislation or government action. That sentence just did not sound right, did it? Illegal immigration is a pillar issue within U.S. politics, at least in terms of conservatives and their support for, he said far, and it's supposed to be for any particular piece of legislation or government action. My position is the conservative one because it is the logical one. I'm not against immigration as long as it's done legally. And there's that word again, legally. Have you seen some of the laws on the books let me pause here for a minute and give you some examples. Now, I just chose the top link here. So, and there's many lists of stupid laws. Alright, so 50 dumb laws in America. The first one comes from Alabama. They say bear wrestling matches are prohibited. Alaska. Moose may not be viewed from an airplane. Do you see the nature of these control freak laws? Arizona, it is illegal to promote the use of or own more than 6 dildos. And these are all laws. People put so much stock into all these idiotic laws, and just look how stupid they really are. Arkansas, it's strictly prohibited to pronounce Arkansas incorrectly. California, animals are banned from mating publicly within 1,500 feet of a tavern, school, or place of worship. Colorado, one may not mutilate a rock in a state park. Connecticut, it's illegal for a barber to hum a tune while cutting your hair. These are your laws, people. Delaware, alcohol may not be served in nightclubs if dancing is occurring on the premise or on the premises at the same time. Florida, having sexual relationships or relations with a porcupine is illegal. Georgia, no one may carry an ice cream cone in their back pocket if it is Sunday. Hawaii, coins are not allowed to be placed in one's ears. Idaho, dirt may not be swept from one's house into the street. Illinois, those under 21 can drink legally, but they must be enrolled in a culinary program to do so. Indiana, no one may catch a fish with his or her bare hands. Iowa, ministers must obtain a permit to carry their liquor across state lines. Kansas, hitting a vending machine that stole your money is illegal. Kentucky, one may not dye a duckling blue and offer it for sale unless more than 6 are for sale at once. What value do any of these laws hold? I'd like to remind you that slavery was once technically legal. And I mean direct compulsion slavery. I suppose people were criminals if they didn't participate in that. Right? Maryland, persons may not swear while on the highway. Massachusetts, candy may not contain more than 1% of alcohol. Michigan, no man may seduce and corrupt an unmarried girl, or else he'd risk 5 years in prison. Minnesota, airplanes may not be landed in city parks. Mississippi, if one is a parent to 2 illegitimate children, that person will go to jail for at least 1 month. And this is only 50 of them. There's thousands of them. Thousands. So, back to where I was here, which was, there we go. So you shouldn't really hold much stock in these laws because most of them are utterly absurd. Okay. Open border policies are a travesty that creates an influx of people who do not necessarily share the values set forth in the American Constitution. We have already seen the economic and social disasters that have befallen Europe due to their open border policies, and it would be foolish to repeat that process here. Yes, it would, but they're going to. No foreign person has a right to access to the United States, just as no American has a right to access their countries. And this is going to, this part of the issue, conservatives are not going to want to hear. Is illegal immigration a form of invasion? He says yes. Now, the unarmed children and women, which there's not very many, by the way, I would have to say that they're not trying to invade. I would say that they're trying to escape the shittiness of their own country. But the military-aged men, I think they probably have a much more nefarious intention. Again, a lot of them are smuggling things like RPGs and automatic rifles. So, but he says yes, especially if it is being encouraged or funded by globalist interests, and which it is. George Soros, among many others, like the Israeli government. That said, we must be careful not to respond to this invasion as if it is a military one, because it isn't. Why? Because the military invasions require military responses, and military responses invariably lead to more power for the government. Troops on the southern border of the United States might sound rational given the circumstances, but I would remind Liberty Movement activists of a little program they should all be familiar with: Rex 84 and Operation Garden Plot. Rex 84 mentions the use of facilities or detention camps as a means to control the hypothetical border invasion. This led to the long-running conspiracy theory of so-called FEMA camps. The pre-existence of FEMA camps is not an issue. I delve into, where's the end of that parenthesis? Okay. The pre-existence of FEMA camps is not an issue I delve into. As we saw during Katrina, a sports stadium could easily be turned into a FEMA camp in a matter of days. And let's not forget all the Walmarts that have been converted into holding facilities. That said, the posture of the Trump administration at this time due to the coming migrant caravan reminds me in a disturbing way to the script outlined in Rex 84. Now, I've talked about Rex 84 a lot, and unfortunately, that was on my old channel, which was banned. So, I'm going to have to get into it again. How far will Trump go to secure the border? Will he declare martial law on the border, as he seems ready to do? Would it stop at the border, or would it spread like a cancer? After all, once martial law is used to deal with unruly migrants, why not use it to deal with unruly leftists? Will conservatives go against their constitutional principles and support such a policy? And I would say yes, they would. Now, there's a good reason why the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 was passed. Originally, it prevented the use of military as law enforcement within the U.S. unless an act of Congress bid otherwise. Of course, George W. Bush and the neocons changed all of that with the John Warner Defense Authorization Act, an act that was barely covered by the mainstream media at the time, and which gives the president full power to declare martial law unilaterally. People like to argue that Posse Comitatus is an outdated concept. No, it's not. It's there to prevent a totalitarian outcome, which we already live in a totalitarian society. So, General Wesley Clark once publicly proclaimed in a MSNBC interview, internment camps could be used in the U.S. for anyone considered disloyal to the U.S. Trump has recently announced a plan for tent cities for incoming migrants, which again sounds a lot like the plan described in Rex 84. He asks, where would the dominoes stop once they start to fall? And like him, I don't think they would stop. So, I suggest that if we support any martial law measures on the southern border rather than revamping existing border patrol agencies and building that wall Trump was so fond of promising, the end result will be martial law measures applied to the rest of us as outlined in Rex 84. The next one is Trump's war with the Federal Reserve. And really, the Federal Reserve should have been taken out a long time ago, but it hasn't. So, Trump's war with the Federal Reserve. I predicted Trump's eventual war with the Fed over a year ago, and I have written on the dangers of such a war recently. So, and again, he has a typo. Dangers of such a war recently. So I will not go into it as much detail on this. I will say that, like the immigration or immigrant caravan, there is another issue in which conservatives could be tricked into reacting without thinking of the long game. In my article, The Economic Endgame Explained, I outlined the strategy being used by globalists to diminish the U.S. economy as a means to open the door to mass support for a global monetary system controlled by the IMF. That's the one I was looking for, IMF. And possibly the Bank of International Settlements. This is a strategy they have openly discussed in their own publications. And the Fed is indeed a destructive force within the U.S. economy. Fed officials have openly admitted on numerous occasions to creating and then bursting financial bubbles that have led to disastrous results for the American public. Jerome Powell, the current Fed chairman, warned in 2012 of the eventual and pervasive market crash that would occur if the Fed raised interest rates and cut balance sheet assets, while markets were still addicted to easy credit. And now he is doing the very same things he warned about, knowing goddamn well what would happen. And we should all support the dismantling of the Federal Reserve. It is a saboteur of the U.S. economy. What this author is concerned about is who will rebuild the U.S. system afterwards. A White House war on the Fed will help cause the death of the dollar's world reserve status. This is a guarantee. Our economy is utterly dependent on this status for its continued stability. The globalists have created a catch-22. If conservatives do not shut down the Fed will continue raising rates and cutting its balance sheet into economic oblivion, just as they historically always have. The everything bubble will burst and a collapse will result. If we shut down the Fed, our currency will lose reserve status and dollars held overseas will come flooding back into the U.S. through various channels, which would cause hyperinflation. Basically, a collapse is unavoidable. And again, who will be in charge of rebuilding our economy? Will it be the American public? No. It will be the globalists. Given the fact that Trump retains banking elites and globalists within his own cabinet, we cannot rely on him to do the work in favor of a free citizenry. And conservatives should be very careful as to who they support and why. So, Brandon Smith thinks these things are going to change the face of America, and they could. Anyway, I thought I'd share this with you. I hope everyone has a good day. Remember, kill the state. Live free.